There's a specific type of person who can feel the storm coming before the sky changes. Not because they're mystical, not because they're psychic, but because their brain learned that noticing first was safer than being surprised. They can read rooms instantly. They can read people instantly. They feel tension even before it's spoken. They can sense the ending before anyone else even notices the beginning. At first, this looks like intelligence, but then something flips because at some point, noticing stops being a skill and starts becoming a way of living. You're no longer aware of your life, you're just witnessing it. And that's where the cost begins. And the problem isn't that you think deeply, the problem is that your nervous system treats uncertainty like danger. So your mind stays switched on all the time, scanning, predicting, rehearsing, running these fictitious simulations. Not because it wants to ruin you, but because it thinks it's protecting you. That's the curse of noticing everything. If this is you, it probably feels like this. You wake up tired even after sleeping. Your body never fully unclenches. You replay these conversations that weren't even important from maybe even years ago. You constantly review yourself after you speak. Did that sound stupid? Why did I say that? Why did I smile there? Did I say everything I intended or needed to say? Why am I like this? And the worst part, it doesn't feel optional. It feels automatic, like your brain is doing it to you. Here's one major distinction that can change everything. There's reflection and then there's rumination. Reflection moves somewhere. It ends, it teaches, it resolves. Rumination just loops. It feels productive, but it doesn't create any movement. Reflection says, that didn't go well. I'll adjust next time. Rumination says, that didn't go well. And what does that say about me? And if this is who I am? And what if this never changes? Same intelligence, same kind of thought, but with a very different outcome. And people who notice everything tend to confuse rumination with self awareness. And here's why that happens, because insight feels good. When your brain connects dots, when it explains something, you feel relief. That moment. But your brain doesn't care whether that insight solves a real problem or just a conceptual one. To your nervous system, the understanding feels like control, and control feels like safety. So the mind learns a dangerous rule. If I can figure it out, I can relax. Except there's no final explanation for being human. So the thinking never ends. You're never off the edge. It's another pattern, another memory, another diagnosis, another self improvement idea, another reason you are the way you are. You can build up a flawless map of your inner world while your actual life stays frozen. That's the trap. This is where we need to bring in metacognition. Metacognition is the ability to notice a thought instead of becoming it. It's that moment when you realize, or where you realize, this is my mind talking. It's not reality. It's the difference between thinking, I'm a failure, and I'm allowed to fail. It's the same thought, but a completely different relationship. And that relationship is the difference between suffering and regulation. Because when you're fused with your thoughts, your body treats them like facts. A thought can become a threat signal. Heart rate rises, your shoulders tense, your jaw locks, your breathing shortens. And then your body confirms the thought and says, see, you're now anxious, so something must be wrong. That's the loop. But when you notice a thought instead of believing it, your body receives completely new information. The information that this isn't happening right now. And slowly and physically, this space appears. Not detachment or not numbness, but this space where you can notice the thought. It's like a little gap in your thinking. And another misunderstanding that keeps people stuck. People think they suffer because they feel too much. But most often, they suffer because emotion hijacks identity. You don't just feel sad or feel sadness. You become sad. You become sadness. You don't just feel anxiety. You become an anxious person. You don't just feel shame. You become someone who is then shameful. Metacognition doesn't disconnect you from emotion. It stops the emotion from defining who you are. Like, you still feel fear, but fear doesn't decide for you. And you still feel anger, but anger doesn't choose your words. That separation is regulation. So where does this pattern come from? For many people, it isn't personality, it's an adaptation. A child, for example, in a stable environment doesn't need to scan constantly for danger. But a child in a more unpredictable environment learns fast that tone matters, silence matters, footsteps matter, micro expressions matter. Safety depends on what you notice, so the child becomes hyper aware. And later that looks like depth, but the nervous system never learned how to stand down. So even in a sense of calm, the mind feels it needs to stay on duty, because calm used to mean just wait for the next thing. And this is how awareness turns into self-surveillance. You stop having experiences and you start watching yourself have them. You don't just speak, you evaluate yourself speaking. You don't just laugh, you check if it sounded normal. You don't just exist, you constantly audit. And the audits will never end. And this is why people who notice everything can struggle with flow. Because flow requires the disappearance of self-monitoring. But self-monitoring pulls you out of the moment every single time. So how do you break this curse? Not with more insight. That's the trick. You can't outthink this. You don't escape rumination by understanding it more, which is hard for someone like me, maybe someone like you, to grasp, because you can't outthink this. You escape by shifting from surveillance to witnessing. Surveillance judges. Witnessing just notices. Surveillance says, fix this, don't mess up. Witnessing says, interesting, my mind is doing that thing again, and stays present. That sounds small, like a small change, but it really isn't. Because every time you witness a thought instead of fusing with it, you reclaim choice. Not control, but choice. And here's a practical way to start without turning your life into a mindfulness project. When you catch yourself spiraling, don't argue with the thought. Just label it. That's a prediction. That's a replay. That's a threat scan. That's my inner critic talking. And labeling creates this distance, this space that we're talking about. And distance creates breadth. And breadth creates the ability to act. Because the real antidote to noticing everything isn't thinking less. It's simply participating more. Not productivity. Not forcing confidence. Small, imperfect action. Speaking anyway, doing it badly. Letting yourself be seen unfinished. Rumination tries to protect you from risk, but life requires risk. Not danger, risk. And that's where actual presence lives and actual awareness lives. You see, awareness is only helpful when it leads somewhere. When it loops back on itself, it stops being intelligence and starts becoming friction. And the goal is never to shut your mind up. I wouldn't want that either. But it's to put it back into proportion. Thinking when thinking is needed. And stepping aside when life is just happening around you and happening fine on its own. And once that balance returns, the same sensitivity that once drained you becomes precision, accuracy, and knowing instead. My name is John. You're welcome to be here, and you're more than welcome to stay here.